Continuing our previous discussion of the autism debate, last time we asked whether we should be researching a cure for autism. My answer/personal opinion on this is no. I wasn't too clear on it on my last post. I was merely stating two different sides of the issue. It is a neurology, and it can't be cured. However, I can understand where cure seekers might be coming from. All the suffering that comes with living as an autistic person in this confusing world, for the cure seekers is often pinned on autism as the cause. They seem to think that if autism goes away, so does the suffering. What they might not realize is that the suffering is hardly ever caused by the autism itself, but by chaotic environments, social ostracization or bullying, repeated gaslighting, abuse, misunderstandings, comorbid psych or health conditions, and a severe lack of the tangible support they need. Now that you know my stance, let's move on to the questions I mentioned in my last post. Number 1. To what extent should we enforce an idea of quote-unquote normal behavior? Number 2, how do we define normal? What does it mean to live a full life? Number 3, if we found a cure, would we be curing autism or just the negative side effects? Today we are discussing number 1. To what extent should we enforce an idea of normal behavior? Personally, I think we should be able to navigate life well enough that we feel capable and like we can thrive. At the same time, I don't believe that we all have to act the same way or have the same needs. When I see an autistic person do a problematic behavior, like having a meltdown or not complying, I always ask first, why do they do it? Not, how can we stop it? And never forget that they are human like you. Different behavior does not mean that they are somehow less human. If you want to change a behavior, it really helps to know why it's there. If the autistic person is having sensory overload, it makes sense to me that they would have a meltdown in response. Imagine that everyone is screaming in your ears, flashing lights in your eyes, and making you wear clothes made of cactuses and sandpaper. And on top of that, they get angry at you for reacting. About ethically addressing behaviors. If a behavior is a result of an autistic person in distress, it's more effective and humane to allow accommodations, like taking breaks, wearing sunglasses and headphones, and their natural forms of expression, like fidgeting, not forcing eye contact, to prevent worse outcomes like meltdowns, rather than just trying to change their behavior only. Autistic responses are inevitable, but distress can become more manageable if that person learns healthy and natural ways to cope, and to be allowed to have those accommodations. If you are worried about the autistic person becoming a target for not acting socially appropriate, know that it's possible to strike a balance between granting an autistic person basic comfort they deserve, while teaching social and functional skills they need to get through life. Teaching self-acceptance is extremely important here. It's too easy to get frustrated with yourself and to give up if you view yourself negatively. Too many autistic adults, including myself, have grown up feeling like we are broken, that we do not deserve basic comfort, love, and boundaries that all humans have a right to. I wish I would have learned about consent and setting boundaries early on, rather than simple compliance. I was not put through ABA therapy, thank goodness, but somehow still learned to be compliant, lest I be corrected or ostracized. I found it increasingly more difficult to retreat back to my inner world to recover, since I had been repeatedly dragged out to socialize or learn facts that I didn't care about, or because God demanded my attention. At some point, I had become a smiling, submissive girl who did what she was told, a people pleaser who thought her worthiness depended on meeting the expectations of others. I credit both being on the spectrum as well as my religious upbringing for that. I had to learn how to accept myself. No one could teach me this. Not pathologizing autism, honestly, would have helped me a lot earlier in life. Negative messages about autism rang in my ears, like, "It's an epidemic," or "They will never live normal lives," or words like obsessive, repetitive, no empathy. My parents were overall accepting of my quirks, and yet it still wasn't enough to offset the negative messages and the pressure that I felt from everywhere, like from school, friends, my job, to perform at a level not natural for me. So, in the process of learning how to balance self-care and self-regulating behaviors with social and functional skills, always treat the autistic person as an intelligent, equal human. Take their needs, rights, and well-being seriously. Make sure they know that they are valuable and that you recognize that they are doing their best. About harmless versus harmful behaviors. Behaviors that are harmless to the autistic person and other people, like stimming, should be left alone. Stimming is a repetitive body movement like rocking, hand flapping, bouncing one's leg, etc., and it can help autistic people release energy and manage anxiety or to filter out sensory input. Now, if it's a harmful or disruption to themselves or others, like self-harm, or stims that truly distract them from learning in school, it would be reasonable to try replacing it with another, more subtle stim, or stim toys like fidget spinners or other sensory items. Stopping the stim altogether is just going to make that person anxious. Keep in mind that stims involving self-harm, like hitting your head, biting yourself, etc., it's often their way of communicating distress. It is not attention-seeking, so do take it seriously. Honestly, I don't see it as much different from a neurotypical tearfully telling a friend, "I am not okay," when they're emotionally overwhelmed, besides the obvious fact that self-harming stims are, well, physically harmful to the person in distress. It is imperative that this type of stimming is stopped so that they don't hurt themselves. But please follow up with them when they've calmed down. Ask them what was distressing them. It could give you some clues about how to help. They could be dealing with severe mental illness or bullying. Perhaps they're being abused at home or have dealt with abuse and are having PTSD reactions. As a side note, aside from a few rare occasions, I've never had self-harming behaviors, so I'm drawing from my experience with mental illness in general and insight from Agony Audie on self-harm, so if you have any questions on the topic, I highly recommend watching her YouTube channel. About teaching functional skills. When it comes down to adapting to society, I think it's always good to teach functioning skills. Each person on the spectrum has different needs and abilities, though, so targeting realistic goals for that specific person is more productive than trying to use a one-size-fits-all method of teaching these skills. For example, some autistic people may be able to work, but struggle with the process of attaining a job. I recommend teaching specific steps according to their preferred learning style. And when I say specific, I mean specific. Personally, I thrive when the steps are written down in simplified bullet points, followed by elaboration beneath each one. For me, the more in-depth, the better. I want to know all the details to ensure that I do the task correctly. Pictures and visuals can also be immensely helpful, especially for autistics who are visual learners. When I was in middle school, I had my entire morning routine broken down into steps on note cards, and there was one step per note card, which helps me get out the door on time. I would have a picture followed by text on each card. For example, get out of bed, brush teeth, pack lunch, put shoes on, etc. As an adult, I have something similar for specific tasks as well as broad ones. I call them routine cards. Check out the video in the description. I put a link to it where it's showing how I actually make these routine cards if you want to know what these are. It's good to encourage an autistic person to work hard and to push themselves when they can, certainly, but it's also good to be realistic about it. For instance, I make my own phone calls and I handle things like bills that I wasn't supposed to be charged or scheduling doctor's appointments. But I need to make these calls at home on a day off since they are very exhausting for me. I should also avoid making calls when I'm driving or cooking or doing other complex tasks, since I could get distracted and make mistakes. And in a car, that mistake could be fatal. I pace a lot when I'm on the phone because it helps me focus. The important thing is that I'm getting things done. What's not as important is how I'm doing them, as long as my methods are not too overwhelming for me or others around me.